Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Sorry about my voice, but I did spend the better part of Saturday screaming my lungs out in a game that matters greatly to us out here in the People's Republic of Washington. What I want to talk to you about today, and I like this when it happens in the sense that it provides us a good opportunity to educate, and that is a teachable or learnable moment. This one comes from Massachusetts. It started as just an everyday exercise of First Amendment rights and ended up with somebody getting shot. When you hear who's been charged with crimes and for what, though, that's what's going to have you most perplexed. And ultimately, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually kind of leave this with you, and I want a lot of you to tell me what you all think. So today, let's slow it all down. Let's watch it play by play, and let's talk about why is this Massachusetts man in jail for defending himself? Okay, Dateline, Thursday last week, in the great state of Massachusetts, 47-year-old Scott Hayes and many others of similar mind were out exercising their First Amendment right, having a peaceful protest. It was a pro-Israeli protest. Enter 37-year-old Caleb Gannon. Now, Mr. Gannon clearly, and when you take a look at his social media profile, does not see eye to eye with the state of Israel, or really doesn't see eye to eye with the United States of America in general. And so he too decided to engage in his First Amendment rights, which he absolutely positively has the right to do. And so the beginning of this confrontation looks a little something like this. Okay, so far all we got is Mr. Gannon obviously getting into a verbal dispute or debate with a female protester over on the same side of the street as Mr. Hayes. Okay, so at this point, no harm, no foul. But you see, Mr. Gannon, like many on the left, has a very difficult time remaining emotionally regulated when discussing how he sees the world. And unfortunately, the next chapter in this story looks a little something like this. Okay. So now we've gone from exercising our First Amendment rights to actually running across the street and violently attacking Mr. Hayes. And I will point out also kind of putting him in a chokehold. Now, I want you to pay very careful attention to what happens next and listen carefully. Okay, now during that scuffle, Mr. Hayes did draw his lawfully possessed, lawfully carried firearm and fire one round into the abdomen of Mr. Gannon. The aftermath looked a little something like this.
Call 911.
So clearly, Mr. Hayes is not spiking the football here. He wants to get Mr. Gannon some medical attention. Now, as you might expect, Mr. Gannon, who did suffer a serious gunshot wound, was treated at the hospital. The good news is he is going to survive. He will also be charged with a crime for running across the street and tackling Mr. Hayes. End of the story, right? Wrong. You see, because Mr. Hayes is also being charged with a crime. And you're sitting there going, well, what crime is he being charged with? Well, according to the Middlesex County prosecutor, he is being charged with assault and battery with a deadly weapon. Now, many of you are probably going to be like, what the heck's going on here? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to break this down here because unlike a lot of other people who've been talking about this huge issue, I just decided that I would go to the Massachusetts pattern jury instructions to see what would a Massachusetts jury be instructed. And what we're going to learn is that when it comes to the use of deadly force, if Mr. Hayes could establish that affirmative defense by preponderance of evidence, which we believe he will, the prosecution is going to have to disprove it one of three ways. Okay, now according to the Massachusetts pattern jury instructions, they would be instructed in the use of deadly force. And I think that anytime you're discharging a firearm into the abdomen of another person, that would be designated as lethal or deadly force. what would a jury be instructed? They'd be instructed as follows. If the defendant used deadly force, which is force intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm, or used a dangerous weapon in a manner intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm, the Commonwealth must prove one of the following three things beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, they got three ways now to disprove lawful self-defense, and they are: first, that the defendant did not reasonably and actually believe that he or she was in immediate danger of great bodily harm or death. This could be the theory by which the Middlesex prosecutor intends on pursuing, that perhaps he's going to argue that Mr. Hayes was certainly in immediate threat of some harm and therefore had the right to use some force, but was not in immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury and therefore not allowed to use lethal force. I would disagree with that, however, because this man comes running across the street, he tackles him with great force, he puts him in a chokehold, could have smashed his head into the pavement right then and there. I would say at this point, Mr. Hayes is in immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury. Now, there's another way. Second, that the defendant did not do everything reasonable in the circumstances to avoid physical combat before resorting to force. Okay, that's right. Massachusetts is a duty to retreat state. And so perhaps maybe the prosecutor is going to argue that he had a duty to retreat. Now, I'm not certain what the duty to retreat is when a guy comes across the road this fast. There's only a couple of seconds here that transpires from this going from just yelling at each other to this guy going completely berserk and coming across the road. And I can see Mr. Hayes standing there as the guy is running across the street, just kind of looking at him like, is this really happening? What's this guy going to do? And maybe expecting him just to come over and start yelling in his face or something. Instead, he comes over, tackles him, and away we go. Now, I've talked frequently about the dangers of duty to retreat states, and I want you to understand that a jury could be instructed in Massachusetts to the following. A person cannot lawfully act in self-defense unless he or she has exhausted all other reasonable alternatives before resorting to force. A person may use physical force in self-defense only if he or she could not get out of the situation in some other way that was available and reasonable at the time. The Commonwealth may prove that the defendant did not act in self-defense by proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant resorted to force without using avenues of escape that were reasonably available and which would not have exposed the defendant to further danger. But again, if we're breaking this video down, doing a play-by-play analysis, how much time did Mr. Hayes actually have to react, okay? And then the third way that the Commonwealth could attempt to prove that this is excessive or unlawful use of lethal force is, third, that the defendant used more force to defend himself or herself than was reasonably necessary in the circumstances. And so maybe it is entirely possible that the prosecutor is going to argue that yes, in fact, he was encountered with unlawful force and he had the right to use some force to defend himself. However, since he was not placed in immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury, his use of lethal force was excessive. And now we go full circle back to what we do when we geek out on this all the time. And that would essentially be an argument, as we know. When it comes down to self-defense, whether it involves a fist or a firearm, whether it's a fat lip or a dead body as a result, every single jury must find the following. Number one, that the force you used was necessary. Number two, that the force you used was reasonable, both subjectively and objectively. And then finally, third, the force you used was proportional. And so the prosecutor's third theory could be that the force here used was disproportional. Now, Mr. Hayes was taken into custody. He was arraigned. There were many supporters there, including many eyewitnesses to what had occurred, and his bail has been posted. But this gentleman is still on house arrest while this case is pending. I want to hear from all of you. We're going to go ahead and link up the video so you can watch it for yourself. We're going to go ahead and link up the pattern jury instructions from Massachusetts so you can see how the law would be instructed to a jury. And then we want to hear from you, okay? Should these charges be dropped immediately and all conditions of release immediately exonerated? Should this gentleman be charged with some crime? Should this gentleman actually be charged, convicted for a crime, and actually put away behind bars? We're interested to hear what you may have to say about it. Listen, in the meantime, if you guys got any questions about self-defense laws or anything else related to what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you guys should know how to get a hold of Washington gun law by now. But if you don't, that's okay. That information, it's all down there in the description box. Maybe you got an idea for a video we should be doing around here. If you do, go ahead and click on that link right there. It's probably going to be a better idea than what we come up with this week. Maybe you just want to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. The ability to do all of that is down there in the description box. And then finally, and most importantly, America, let's remember, the part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching and stay safe.